If we go back a year ago, there had been a great trend in silver that took it from the March lows below $12 up to 30 by August last year, then back up to 30 again in early January of this year. But since then, it's been a bit flat. It's fallen out of the trend. So what does this mean for silver? Do we have to put on hold any hopes for further rises, or actually is it just having a pause before the next move back above $30? I know silver's always a popular one on the channel, so I thought we'd do an update on it. And you can see, if we look at the month so far in April, it's been a pretty good month. It ended March around $24.40 an ounce, so it's moved a couple of dollars higher. I think a weaker US dollar has helped there. I think there's also the question, from a technical point of view, whether this correction from the early Feb highs, that time when it very briefly traded above 30, is this correction over and we can start being a lot more bullish in the price of silver and pick up on this new trend? So as usual in this video, I'll talk about what's been driving it, then we'll look at this, we'll come back onto this and look at it in more depth and see if there's a trade to do. Of course, we do have a couple of trades running at the moment, slightly against us from mid-Feb and early March. So we'll take a look at those when we'll come back as well. But is silver finally getting a bit of momentum again after this correction it's been in for the last couple of months? And is it time to start looking at higher prices? Hello, I'm David Jones from Capital.com, and I thought we'd do an update on the price of silver. So as usual, in this video, I'll talk a bit about what's been driving it recently, what analysts are expecting for the rest of the year, the big levels to watch, what could drive it. Then we'll jump back onto the trading platform, look at things in a bit more detail and see if there's a trade to do. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, if you could click on subscribe, it does help support the channel. And of course, every Friday now at 2:30 in the afternoon UK time, we do our live streams where we take a look at the markets in real time, the usual markets we cover, and some extra ones as well. If you're subscribed with the alarm bell notification clicked, you get a message off YouTube just when we're about to go live. Okay, let's get into it and take a look at silver. So the year so far has been a pretty volatile one for silver. We're only 4 months into the year and we've seen the price trade from as low as $24 an ounce up very briefly above $30 an ounce. So we have seen a 20% swing for the price of silver this year. We could well expect that volatility to increase. But let's talk about some of the factors that have been driving it. In recent weeks, we have seen the US dollar lose ground. So normally when we see a weaker US dollar, then the likes of gold and silver will be helped by that. So I think that has helped support silver somewhat in recent weeks, although we haven't seen that dramatic a move. We'll take a look at the charts in a second. One of the hopes for the silver bulls this year, those who want the price to increase, is that we see economies getting more back to normal. Of course, after the last year of the coronavirus pandemic, we'll see industrial activity get back to normal. And something like, I think, a half of silver is used in industrial processes. So if we saw that get back to normal, those who are bullish on silver would expect the demand for the metal to increase and help lift the price. Inflation has been something of a hot topic for markets over recent weeks. There's some people thinking that perhaps in the US, for example, that the central bank, the Federal Reserve, isn't concerned enough about the threats of inflation as the year goes on. Now, again, bullish analysts on silver would point to this as another argument that the price of silver should increase from here. Classically, the likes of gold and silver are used as a hedge against inflation, so something to keep pace with the cost of living. So if those inflation concerns did ramp up, some are saying we should see the price of silver start to move higher. But at the moment, none of this is being reflected in the price. I've referred to it a bit as a boring market in recent weeks. And if you look at where silver is trading now, at the time of recording, just above $26 an ounce. That's where it ended 2020. So, the story so far for this year for silver, plenty of volatility, but no real change. But that doesn't mean there aren't still opportunities. Let's talk about some of the big levels to watch, then we'll jump back onto the chart. So it is trapped in something of a tight range at the moment. Even in the last 24 hours or so, it's had another look at this $26.60 high. Can't quite yet get the momentum to break through it. And on the downside, lows from early April, just ahead of $24.50 an ounce, have supported any short-term weakness. So let's take a look at some short and medium-term opportunities in silver and see if there's a trade to do. So let's start things off with this longer-term trend for silver, or the trend over the last year, at least, off the March lows, and see where we are. It's done a pretty good job, this trend. You know, we've got a few touches on it. It did very briefly in early Feb push out to a higher high, traded to, about $30.04. That high from back in August last year was $29.85. So managed to push 20 cents higher through that old high. It didn't last very long. And since then, we've fallen out of the trend. But as I often say, when we're looking at markets on the live streams, just because a market falls out of its trend line doesn't mean the trend has changed and it's going to fall off a cliff. Often, we can just see it continuing at something of a slower pace. And I do wonder if that's what's happening with silver now. If you look at the correction that we had off those Feb highs, that did a pretty good job in the short term, with a few touches on that trend line of keeping the price under pressure. I think what's interesting to me, it came back and had a look at those old lows, those $24 an ounce lows from mid-Jan. It did trade briefly below that. 23.76 was the low at the end of March. But since then, it's turned things around. So for me, from a short-term trading point of view, we'll take a look at the shorter-term chart in a minute. Stop losses the other side of $24 make sense. If we're trying to catch a bigger swing, then probably back below these levels from late September, 21.65, that sort of area. But I'd like to have a look at this recovery in a bit more detail. Before we do, let's just have a look at the indicators. So down here, we've got MACD, usual MACD settings of 12, 26, 9, the textbook, the default settings. The last signal we had from the MACD was in April, as the price was rising early April the 6th. The price moved up through $25. The MACD crossed over, giving us a buy signal. That signal's done okay since then. And at the moment, the MACD is still long. It doesn't look like we're going to get a sell signal in the short term. It's still holding on to that long position. Let's take a look at the RSI. So here's the RSI, slightly different picture to the MACD. We had a buy signal all the way down here, which was pretty good. On the extremes, down at $24 back in March, late March, so an oversold signal anyway. And it's flipped the other way, because the market has rallied. What is it? It's almost 10%. Well, it pretty much is 10%, isn't it? From 24 to 26.40. The RSI has gone overbought. This RSI this is 10-day RSI on silver, has done a pretty good job in the past of calling the turns when it's pushed into overbought. So perhaps we need to be a little bit cautious in the short term, but maybe it gives us an opportunity to buy in at a better level. Let's take a look. What I'm going to do, let's flip this to an hourly chart and take a look at perhaps the last couple of months, the intraday movements. So you can see again here that correction off the Feb highs, briefly above 30. Did a good job of holding the market lower. We had a breakthrough of the trend line, slip back, retest, and has continued to recover. So for me now, looking at the short-term trend on silver, what I want to look at is the recovery off those March lows. And this is where we are. So the trend off the March lows is coming in around $25.60, let's call it, which does tie up with some of these sort of spiky sell-offs from 25.80 to 25.60. So I suppose from a really short-term trading point of view, if I was trading it now, the closest I want my stop, looking at this recovery that's been in place for much of April, is the other side of 25.60 somewhere. I'd be a bit concerned that this high has been a problem back in March, so $26.60, that sort of level. So I think that is a bit of a hurdle on the upside. I suppose there's a breakout trade here. If we move through 26.60 properly, we could start targeting a run back up to those late February highs at 28.20. So I think in the short term, on the daily chart, we know it's overbought on the RSI. So perhaps we see the price come under a bit of pressure here. But if it were to slip below $26, I'd be watching for strength to come back in and looking to see if this old trend holds around $25.60. So perhaps in the short term, a bit of pressure, but still looking to buy the dips on this little recovery. I think it will be some time before we see $30. You know, I said there in the introduction that I think it's a pretty boring market still from a medium-term perspective, but short-term, we get little trends like this. You can see that resistance level, that barrier at 26.60 from March. If we can break that, you know, I think pushing back into the range for much of Feb looks to be the next objective. So for me, still happy to be a buyer on dips, looking at that short-term trend recovery. And ultimately, if we did see a bigger sell-off, 23.75 to 24 has been good support. That's it for the update. We'll see if things get a bit more exciting. But for now, from me, David Jones and Capital.com, good luck with your trading. For more trading videos just like this, please subscribe to our channel.